Hey, what's up, y'all? Kevin Estopanol here with a good friend of mine, professor of Cornell University, Dave Collum. Professor Dave, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Getting off of a rough bout of grandchildren disease where they come and visit and turn me into a sack of crap. But
Well, now
I'm
your immune
recovering.
system will be boosted. You're building the
That's how it
antibodies.
works.
This
War
thing
of the
called
Worlds.
this thing called natural immunity now. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
heard of it.
Rumors, only rumors.
So, Dave, I actually finished reading your year in review. It was incredible. So I kind of want to give you the floor. Is there anything from that year in review you want to go over? What is one specific thing, maybe the biggest thing you want to point out to my audience, something that's maybe being underreported right now?
Well, as you know, the war in Ukraine is the thing that caught my eye. And I actually left 60 pages of rough draft on the cutting room floor about COVID and the vaccine because there's just too many people digging at that story. So I'll let them do it. I would do it funnier,
Mhm.
but I just decided no, I don't need to do anymore. So I dug into the war in Ukraine starting from scratch, from complete scratch. I had written a little bit about Putin since 2014. He caught my attention as an interesting person, and and so I had been paying some attention to him, trying to understand the person, and um, and then when the drums of war showed up, and there was this hot negotiating crap going on. You you want me to keep the f bombs out, or don't you care?
Do what you want, Dave. Be yourself.
Okay, I just have to ask. Some guys say no, I got to bleep every one. Um, so uh, so the war immediately caught my attention. And I had already figured out the sort of Putin NATO battles going on and stuff way before the war, way before the war. And when the war started, it looked strange to me. I was picking up all the things that were not consistent with what we were being told. And so I dug in hard on that. So yeah, the war in Ukraine, the story you've gotten off the mainstream press is a stream of lies, a
Well,
stream of lies.
so it's interesting you bring that up because I actually have some quotes from your year in review regarding that. And the first one is from the great George Carlin. I have certain rules I live by. My first rule is I don't believe anything the government tells me, nothing, zero. And the second quote is from Joe Biden. I'm sick of this stuff. The American people think the reason for inflation is the government spending more money. Simply not true. Dave, what do you think of that?
Well, I didn't write much. I didn't write hardly anything about Biden except where I could slip in the occasional humorous comment or something where it was contextually important. But I could have imagined in another mood I would have written a whole chapter on Biden and his henchmen. I'm torn on him because he's on the one hand demented, on the other hand, during his moments of clarity, he's a sick bastard. So I don't know whether to give him a pass, but there's nothing that tells me if dementia had stayed away that he'd be anything but an evil person, pretty much. So
Now, the war in Ukraine, what I guess the mainstream media narrative would be, the CNN narrative is that, we need to protect the poor citizens of Ukraine from the evil dictator Putin, who is threatening their national sovereignty. He's invading them. But I'm seeing, from your year in review and different reports that Putin, listening to Putin's speeches, which, conveniently Putin isn't on any of our mainstream media to hear the other side. But what Putin is saying is that NATO and Ukraine has biolabs, which are on the Russian border, and that these biolabs may have some type of gain of function research or doing stuff that he doesn't want near his country. Is this accurate?
I don't know if he cares about the biolabs as much as that. The biolabs come into play because they show that we've been up to no good for a long time in that country. But I think, the more important stuff is that if you binge watch Putin's speeches, which I have, now they're always translations, so maybe the person's lying to me, but it would be a pretty stupid thing to do to fake a translation when there are Russian speakers running around. Um, what you find is that compared to the Western leaders, he's got his head on straight, and I don't doubt that he's tough. I don't doubt that he is has. I don't doubt he's whacked people. I don't doubt that he's been at times brutal. Um, that applies to us too. And so when I get into the uttermost depths of a battle, or someone says you Putin loving blah blah blah, right? I go, look, let's take a quick look at this. Which country, Russia or the United States, has bombed more countries in the last 20 years? Which country has killed more people in the last 20 years? And I get a bad response sometimes. They go, well, these guys are evil. I go, Obama bombed 7 Muslim countries. How many of those attacked us? The answer is none.
And drone strikes too. I mean,
and drone strikes. And then this year we bombed Syria 3 days in a row. And the official line was that we did it to send Tehran a message. And I go, I don't remember. I didn't realize that Tehran was in Syria. And then, of course, most people realize that it's not. And then you go, so we bombed a country to send a message to a different country. Show me something Putin's done that's at that level of evil, right? A simple little 3 days of bombing. So I was on a podcast with I'm in a doctor Zoom group that talks about COVID, and they've had every imaginable COVID expert on. And at one point we had a clergy member, and somehow the topic of Ukraine came up. We said, well, by definition, Putin's the bad guy because he attacked. And I chimed in and I said, here's the deal. I said, if I'm ever in a tight spot with a guy, the minute I realize that this is not going to go well, I'm thinking, how do I drop the first punch so that there is no second punch? Right? I learned that in kindergarten on the bus. I can remember this. Is really fun. I remember stupid stuff. The biggest kid in the second grade, big fat kid, but big kid. And I was tiny. So I was like 30 pounds. And this kid probably weighed 100. And he sort of landed on me during the raucous of the school bus. And I said to him, this is a kindergarten put down. I said, get off me, Rumpelstiltskin. Right? And he got up and he came at me. And I don't know what his intentions are. And so I planted a fist right in the bam, right where it hurts, right? And he went down for the count, crying his eyes out. I go, oh, that worked.
Yeah, because even if you lose the fight with the big kid, no one else is going to mess with you because they know you'll fight back.
Right. And so once Putin realized that there was things he had to do, he then had to do it, right? So just because he struck first doesn't mean he was the perpetrator.
And, I've seen, a lot of his speeches, and he's called for peace talks multiple times. It seems that our leaders in the West do not want the peace talks. And it seems, very logical, a lot of what he's saying. And then when you start tying in, Joe Biden's son, Hunter, he's on the board of Ukrainian gas company. I believe Mitt Romney's got family on the board of, something else is going on in Ukraine. Aren't they one of the #1 grain exporters in the world? The Donbass region, I believe, is very mineral rich. So it's like something bigger is going on. I don't believe our government maybe fully cares about the citizens of Ukraine like they say they do.
Well, so the first thing, I also tear into what I call the Sanctimony industrial complex, which are the people who will pick up a cause and wave the flag. In this case, it's a yellow and blue flag, without having a clue what they're talking about. And they will then attack you because you don't agree with them. And the Sanctimony industrial complex in this case is they're completely and utterly unaware that Zelensky is a total sack of shit. I mean, he is a really bad guy. And he has all sorts of corrupt ties to, Ukrainian oligarchs. And he banned not only the major political opponent and all the media outlets, he kicked him out of Ukraine. He kicked the 10 parties out of Ukraine that weren't even relevant. He banned, amazingly enough, Christianity from Ukraine.
Yep.
Yeah. And he's been involved with the Azov Battalion, which is a group of ruthless Nazis. Now, people hear me say Nazi, they're going, well, he's being metaphorical. No, I'm not.
Literal Nazis.
Literal Nazis. They celebrate Stepan Bandera's birthday. Bandera was a World War II Nazi hero who was buddies with Goebbels, fought against the Russians and the Ukrainians. They're ethnic cleansers. They're savages. They're Mexican drug cartel level bad. And so And so in 2014, what George Friedman of Stratford called the most blatant engineered coup in history, which is quite a high bar. The CIA knocked off the ruling party in Ukraine, and we installed our NATO puppet. And then Zelensky got elected in 2019. I think it was 19. But Zelensky is owned by the Azov guys. So these Azov guys do things like when they catch Russian soldiers, they castrate them. They kill people at will. I mean, again, drug cartel level savagery.
And Dave, let me add a little context for anybody listening, because I know a lot of this probably sounds wild, and for a lot of people, this is probably their first time hearing this. If you Google CNN Azov Battalion, you see our mainstream media has done stories on these neo-Nazis before in Ukraine, but now they don't talk about it now because it's not in their financial interest. So also too, there's been a lot of videos that's leaked of Ukrainian soldiers. And, they're talking about that, Ukraine is forcing them to fight in the war. And a lot of times it's not the Russians killing them on camera. This is Ukrainian soldiers on camera. It's the elements. It's the cold killing them. And they're blaming Zelensky for propagating this war.
Well, so here's what I think to give Zelensky some slack. Before the war started, Zelensky actually spoke up against the United States and said that they were stirring up tensions. Zelensky was, I think, trying to cut a peace deal with Putin in April, and then Boris Johnson showed up. And basically, the word on the street is that Johnson said, "Don't even think about it." And since Zelensky's enough of a prostitute that he doesn't want to cut off NATO money, here's the rhetorical question I like to ask people: if we cut off NATO funds to Ukraine, how much longer would the war last? The answer is a day. Right. The minute we cut off funds. Yeah. So Zelensky starts squealing about something and more funds show up. And so one of the early rumors, it was speculative, was that the Azov guys, who were CIA funded, CIA trained, that these guys basically went to Zelensky and said, "You're on our team or you're going to die a horrible death. Make the call." And so Zelensky said, "Well, since I'm kind of hoping to retain power and live, sure." And the theory was actually that Putin felt he could work with Zelensky, and that the theory was, this is such a great theory, it might not be close to true, but was that this pundit thought that Russia probably had an extraction team very close. And then if things started to look hot, they'd take their commandos and grab Zelensky and get him out of there.
Wow.
Right, that sort of thing. But NATO will not let Zelensky negotiate. They will not. They say they will. But when you say, look, we should go to the negotiating table, but not if Putin's in power, why don't you say nuke us now, right? And at one point Biden said Zelensky's got to Putin's got to go. The regime's got to go. John Bolton said we have to figure out a way to assassinate Putin. NATO has said by far the most horrific things, by far, by a country mile, by far.
Well, Zelensky called for a preemptive strike into Russia. It's almost like they are propagating this war. Like they almost want nuclear war. And I believe that is Russia one of like the second or third largest nuclear superpower in the world. Like what?
Yeah. And Putin did not push nuclear response. The Western media has been saying that Putin pushed nuclear response. So it's all Western media saying Putin's been saying nuclear weapons are going to be used. No, it's the West saying it. So the media on the left has been pushing us into World War III. Now, if you want to catch up, so you can read my year in review. There's something like 400 links out of the Ukraine section. So there's stuff that could keep you busy watching podcasts and whatever, reading articles throughout the entire year. The most militant anti-NATO pundit is a professor at the University of Chicago named John Mearsheimer, who I actually have been in communication with. And for 10 years, he has been saying that NATO is pushing us toward nuclear war. For 10 years, he's been saying it. And you listen to Mearsheimer, the guy is high level. And he sent me a debate he did with Steve Walt, who was also very high level. And they debated the former defense minister of Poland and the former ambassador to Russia, McFaul. Mm-hmm. And the Sikorsky McFaul team, they were despicable the way they argued the debate. And Mearsheimer was mad, actually. And Sikorsky's the guy who's calling for nuclear weapons to be brought into Poland. And Putin pointed out that, we've got a problem here because they want to put nuclear weapons within 7 minutes striking distance of Moscow. We can't allow this. Someone explained to me how anyone would ever allow it. So I like to ask the rhetorical question: if they put serious weapons along the Mexican border, how long would it take for us to turn Mexico into a sheet of glass? And the answer is seconds.
Of course. Now, we see obviously the amount of funding going to Ukraine. Zelensky came to our capital and held the flag in Congress.
That was despicable.
Disgusting. But let me ask you this, Dave. Could you break this down? Is there any chance that Ukraine could win this war? Because what I'm seeing is that reports, they don't have power, they don't have infrastructure. Is there any chance? So no matter how many Patriot missile systems we send, no matter what type of training, is there any chance Ukraine can win this war?
Here's my understanding. So if you listen to the mainstream media, Ukraine is on the 2-yard line trying to punch it over the end zone, right? If you go and listen to guys like Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who's sort of cabinet level advisor to the president kind of guy, Richard Black, who in a recent podcast I called Stephen Black for some reason, 30 years in the military, Virginia State Senate, open letter to Congress saying you're botching this one. Guys like Glenn Greenwald, guys, Jacques Bode, who I think is a CIA analyst. There's probably 25 guys out there who have been beating the drum saying you're being fed a load of malarkey. Mm-hmm. So if you go listen to McGregor or Scott Ritter, who's got a sketchy background, but he's been battling the deep state for so long that you don't know if sketchy's just because they created sketch, right? Because they will destroy you if they have to. So if you listen to McGregor, he says, look, the kill ratio, Ukraine versus Russia is something like 10-1.
Wow.
And he says the Russian army is not weak at all. He said any of those news reports are just stupid saying the Russian army is weak. So here's the entertaining part. So Ritter early on said, here's what Russia's going to do. He said, this force they have amassed it's not an occupying force. It's not big enough. You occupy a country, you got to bring in millions, right? You don't occupy a country with 50,000. He said what they're going to do is they're going to avoid urban warfare at all costs. And I infer, he didn't say this, but I inferred, I try not to read books on subjects that I'm piecing together. I often read them afterwards. But I was desperate to learn more about Putin the man, so I read a book about Putin and the rise and reign of Vladimir Putin or something like that. It was a very strange book because it was actually fairly flattering. And then the minute he was elected president in the book, to the page, they said nothing good ever again. So the second half of the book was all Putin is bad, as though someone else either wrote it or took it and re-edited it or something. And he was said to be unbribable, for example. Mm-hmm. He was said to be profoundly loyal. And you go, well, yeah, he demands it. You go, yeah, but when he was a foot soldier,
he was KGB, correct?
He was KGB, and then he quit the KGB to become a politically connected guy. And they said, don't quit. And he said, no, I can't work for two bosses. So he quit the KGB. And the storyline up until he became president is that he, as a soldier for whoever he's working, was infinitely loyal. Mm-hmm. And if he couldn't be loyal, he didn't work for the guy, that sort of thing. They said he's stinking rich. Well, he's very high ranking. At one point, his wife needed surgery, had to borrow money. Mm-hmm. So where's all the stinking wealth that they claim he has? Now, he has been running Russia in a top-down economic model that I don't think works well. Part of the problem is Russia is such a disaster that if there's not some guy at the top saying, stop doing that, then it's so if you read Browder's book, who I think is actually dishonest beyond comprehension, but Browder does a good job of explaining how the oligarchs got all their money. And so I think Putin was dealing with such corruption that he had to do a top-down thing where he said, okay, you, the guy I trust, gets this. And so the people around him look like they're making fabulous amounts of money. The reason is because he's a top-down guy and he has surrounded himself with people he trusts.
Mm-hmm.
And so in any case, I think when Putin started, in the book, what really scarred Putin was the war in Chechnya, which he inherited. But he got terrible civilian casualties and things didn't go well. And I think that he said, don't let that happen again. So the comical start to the war where the West was saying, oh, it's savage, it's awful. And then the footage showed nothing. I mean, there really was, you could not see the war.
Yeah,
and I'd say to my wife, I'm not seeing the war. And she thought I was nuts. I go, no, I'm seeing explosions that are so far away, you can't tell what blew up. I'm seeing cars on fire. I go, could be Detroit. I'm seeing buildings that are destroyed. Could be Baltimore, right? And you'd see the same building over and over and over. Mm-hmm. So Ritter said what Putin's going to do is he's going to make head fakes to the cities. The Ukrainian troops will pull back into Kyiv and places like that. And then Putin would run around them. And what he would do is hit the military targets he had to hit. Now, his invasion of Ukraine, I believe, is correct when they say that it's to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Mm-hmm. He needed to gut the Ukrainian army, the militants, and they happen to also be Nazis. And so, like the Azov style holdout. Remember when the Azov style guys were in the steel mill? Mm-hmm. And there were civilians, and they said they were protecting the civilians. No, they weren't. They were using shields.
Human shields.
Yeah. And so supposedly when the people got out finally, and they're walking around, they're going, wait a minute, there's no war out here. Mm-hmm. They thought they were in like the Alamo or something, right? And so I think the Azov guys, to use a brutal term, which I think is probably appropriate, probably got exterminated. Mm-hmm. So you surround the Azov battalion in a steel mill. Once you capture it, I don't think those guys had a pleasant experience going forward, because I think he wanted them gone.
Yeah, I've seen in his speeches where he's talked about that. I've also seen where he's talked about the inflation that's happening with the US dollar in the West, and almost preaching to other countries that, hey, let's get away from this US dollar dominance and get to a different currency, because the inflation we're seeing in the West isn't going anywhere, despite, maybe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. And we're seeing, whether it be Russia, China, these different nations actually backing their currencies backed with gold. So what I think I'm seeing from the United States now is, if you're getting away from the dollar standard, we're going to war with you.
That could be that could be the story. Yeah, that could be the story. Now, the other thing he says, so we put sanctions on Russia all the time. Mm-hmm. That's an act of war, in my opinion. Right? I don't care if you're not shooting a cannon.
Economic war, yeah, and what do the sanctions
hurt? It's a highly militant move.
The sanctions hurt the citizens. That's
so Putin has pointed out that by commandeering resources like this, by stealing bank accounts and stuff like that, he said, how is that possibly now a dependable reserve currency? Mm-hmm. How can you trust the U.S. banking system? How can you, if that if NATO really got control of Ukraine, in a heartbeat, if we wanted to, we'd cut off Russia. And he needs Ukraine. He desperately needs Ukraine, not ownership-wise. He needs access to the Black Sea. He needs access to certain ports. There's the Russian fleet. And so he needed Ukraine not to be controllable by NATO. Mm-hmm. And that would allow them to shut off Russia.
Wow.
And so it's existential risk. Mm-hmm. And so again, and no, I'm not a Putin apologist. I'm just pointing out that we've cornered a goddamn tiger, and now we're bitching about the fact that he's acting like he's going to kill us.
And I make it very clear on my channel, Professor Dave. I'm anti-war. I'm anti-war.
I'm totally anti-war.
And I see one side that's calling for peace and calling for discussion, and another side that is calling for preemptive nuclear strikes, essentially. And I don't see an end in sight, unfortunately. Do you see this conflict being prolonged?
Well, first of all, what you'll hear from the Western press now is that we're calling for peace negotiations. But if you listen to them carefully, they are an offer that cannot be accepted by Putin. So the provisions in it make it impossible. That would be like saying to your wife, you know, we can stay married, but I get to have all the girlfriends I want. So you can say you're negotiating with your wife, but you're not really negotiating in good faith, right? And so it makes for good press, but it's a pack of lies. So I think the end of the war is potentially when Putin finally wins. And if McGregor's correct, you know, he says the Ukrainians are getting destroyed. So here's the inhumane part of the story. We are giving the Ukrainians weapons to go get slaughtered. And we are treating Ukrainians the way Longshanks in Braveheart treated the Irish. He said, we don't care if the Irish die, they're free. And so we had senators saying we want to see more hand-to-hand combat. I go, why don't you go over there, you piece of crap?
Mitch McConnell said the number one thing on Republicans' like agenda is the war in Ukraine. That's the number one thing. And I'm like, how can they be this disconnected?
I'm a Republican. I voted for Bush Jr. once, not twice, because of the Iraq War. And I've not always been anti-war. I've just not seen a war in a long time that's justified. In fact, you go, how far do you have to go back? Well, the logical one for most people say, no, the Gulf War. So Saddam invades Kuwait. We got to go save the Kuwaitis. Well, there's a paper trail that shows that we told Saddam, we have no problem if you go into Kuwait. So we set up Saddam to take the bait, and then we took him out. So you have to go back to World War II, and even World War II. If you read, a friend of mine named Ben Steele wrote The Battle of Bretton Woods. My claim to fame is I copy edited it for him, and nice. It became a New York Times bestseller. I'm told on the inside cover I get credit or the acknowledgments. I've never seen the hard copy. I listen to audio, and he said that during World War II, our Lend-Lease program in that book was designed to bend the Brits over a barrel so badly that they would never be a superpower ever again. Wow. So our Lend-Lease program was sold as, our brothers who are fighting abroad and they need everything we can do. And even though we're not in the war, we'll give them everything they need. Well, we made them sign deals that guaranteed they never get out from underneath our thumb.
Wow.
So it was not a teary-eyed moment. People say, you know, fighting the Japanese was totally legit because they attacked Pearl Harbor. Well, two things. One is we had our foot totally on the throats of Japan. They couldn't get energy into Japan. They couldn't do anything. Now, Japan was rollicking around Indochina doing things that they shouldn't be doing, maybe. But that's not our business. It really is not our business.
We're not the world police. Yeah, we're not the world police.
Well, we apparently are, but we shouldn't be, right? And so then anyone who thinks that we didn't know Pearl Harbor is going to get attacked is out of their gourds. They're completely nuts. Because first of all, we had their foot on their throats. Second of all, we didn't even have guys in guard towers. F Troop had guys in guard towers. Right? I don't know if you're F Troop, but it was a comedic TV show about the cavalry. You would have plane spotters at all times. You'd be watching, and they said, there's all this jet. I go, well, then you'd really have guys on the beaches watching. We knew they were coming. We pulled the carriers out. There were admirals saying, get the fleet out of there. They're going to get destroyed. Written letters from admirals saying, get them out of there. And we ignored it.
Now, Dave, something you did say, and honestly, when you said this, my jaw was on the floor because my audience, we're in a crypto stocks, we're real estate, we're trying to make money. And you said, and I'll quote, that you think that we're going into a 20-year bear market. And I believe you said that this is just the beginning of it. And, that's obviously terrifying for me. But, people, my mom's age who has, retirement with the market, like this is, horrifying. And I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong.
Well, so here you want the pitch.
Well, I guess, yeah, I do. And I guess bring in where the inflation comes into that and where the interest rates, because I'm sure that's all connected to this, correct?
Well, yes and no. The inflation is the thing that's going to make all the options disappear.
Mm-hmm.
So the inflation is just a modern thing. The pitch is, here's the pitch, and I'm channeling several people plus some of my own stuff. In 1981, the valuations of the markets were absolutely in the basement. The valuation of bonds were in the basement. So you could get a bond and make 15, 16%. You could get equities with PE ratios of 6, 7. So you're getting huge returns. But it had been such a beating up until then because of the 67 to 81 bear market that no one wanted them. So that's the real bottom, when they're as cheap as theoretically possible, and no one wants them because they've been so brutal. So if you start in 1981, the equity valuations, which is always a price to some metric that the price ought to follow, whether it's GDP, whether it's book value, whether it's earnings, no matter what, right? I follow 25 of them. The equity valuations expanded 3% a year for the next 42 years on average. So 3% of your gains are simply layering of froth.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're at all-time highs. We've taken off a tiny little sliver off the top. We've backed out the gains since 2021. If that's the end of it, I will be staggered. Now, in 1981-ish, let's just call it 81 as the beginning, but about that time, China came out of the dark ages. They were so starved for capital that when their leader, and don't make me pronounce his name,
Was it Ma?
No, he was asked to speak at the United Nations. So China approached Kissinger, not vice versa, it turns out. The guy was asked to speak at the United Nations. Mm-hmm. To get to the UN, China had in their banking system their foreign reserves of $38,000. Wow. So they had to go with a tin cup to get the money to send their leader to the UN. So what did they do? They sold labor for pennies on the dollar for the next 42 years. Mm-hmm. Now that labor's not cheap anymore. Russia was starting to collapse. The Soviet Union was starting to collapse. It took another 8 or 9 years, but they were rotting pretty badly. They needed capital badly. And so they started selling resources more aggressively. So we were blanketed with labor by the Chinese. We're blanketed with resources by Russia and a number of other countries. The United States valuations were in the basement, so there was nothing to go but up. The interest rates were at 16% over the next 42 years. They went from 16 to 0. And if you read Warren Buffett's Fortune article from 1999, he said that's the whole story. A 40-year change in interest rates will tell you whether it was a good period or not, period. And then we've had disinflation the whole way. So inflation would start high, and then it's been slowly, methodically marching its way down. None of those things are going to repeat themselves. The US demographics was the boomers were sort of sliding into the workforce. They brought their wives, as I like to say. So, and economists will tell you demographics is everything too. Mm-hmm. And so the boomers were just starting to become really productive. And for the next 42 years, this huge slug of people banged away on the economy. Mm-hmm. And that's over. So every one of those tailwinds is gone. Now, what's our headwind? For the first time in 42 years, inflation is a real threat. It's not a real threat, it's real. Now, you can believe the Fed is going to fight it, but I'm positive that if they fight it in earnest, you're going to hear breaking bones, smashing teeth. It's really going to be painful. We're not talking 20% from here. So my best guess, if you look at the 25 valuation metrics, mm-hmm. they all went above historical fair value and didn't look back in 1994. Now, in 2008-9, they kind of dipped a little below fair value for about a month. I'm not alone saying that. Mark Spitznagel said it. Jeremy Grantham said it. Buffett, in his 99 article, said, valuation aside, if you take away all the fees and everything, but not taxes, which is critical, but it's very complicated to calculate. He said, you can't get more than 4% a year. Harsh reality.
Well, that's why
Average,
most financial advisors just invest in the whole index, right? The whole, mutual funds to try to beat, that, but that's not going to be possible anymore, you're saying.
So they've drilled the valuations up to the stratosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So now they squeeze the last drop out of that citrus fruit. Mm-hmm. In every respect, demographically, Russia, China, valuations, interest rates, demographically, every last one of those tailwinds is now going or gone. And the Fed is looking right into the eyes of inflation. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, can the next 40 years possibly be as good? So the recency bias is 42 years of everything always works. Now, one of the consequences of the Fed being able to drop rates steadily for 42 goddamn years is that every dip, which I'll call 50% drop a dip, mm-hmm. got bought.
Of course.
We had V bounces the whole way.
Of course.
So the investors for 42 straight years were taught, don't sell, just hang on. Mm-hmm. Now, what if we go into a period like the Nikkei? So you're sitting in the Nikkei 1989. It's a big industrial market. It's at the top. Mm-hmm. You didn't even find the bottom for 15 years. Jeez. If you were in the Nikkei, you're still underwater by 50% inflation adjusted. Mm-hmm. You're halfway home. Now, if you invested the whole way and, you rolled all your dividends, everything in, it was something like 25 years to break even. If you were not in the Nikkei and you started buying at the top, you started buying $1,000 a month every month from 89 on. I had a guy do the spreadsheet for me. It took 18 years to break even. So it was uninvestable. So I think our equity markets will be uninvestable. Now, there will be people who find seams, no question. There will be countries that are investable, no question. But when the mega hegemonic country and the West mm-hmm. are all in trouble, you got to figure on average you're gonna suffer.
Of course. So is there any sector that you see opportunity, whether it's stocks? I know you're not the biggest crypto guy, real estate. Is there any silver lining that maybe investors should look at?
Well, I can just say what I do. I believe that in the next couple of years, so we've just skimmed off some froth, like a beer where you ran a knife across the top, right? And we're just starting. That just alerts investors trouble is coming. Mm-hmm. As David Einhorn once said, where I was at a dinner with a bunch of guys, some young punk was spewing off about the profit margins of tech and how rich he'd be and stuff like that. And Einhorn sort of in an unusual kind of way snapped. He's a very sort of soft-spoken minimum. When you talk to him, it's like you're deposing him, mm-hmm. and he's giving you minimum. And he kind of snaps. He says, do you have any idea what it's like to ride a position down 95%? Do you have any idea? And the guys do it, And then Einhorn says, you know what a 95% correction is? It's a 90% correction that then cuts in half. Mm-hmm. He says, wow. You have no idea what you're dealing with here. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of eye-popping. When it got to my turn to speak, I said, well, David said everything I'd say, so I'm good. So in any event, I think the markets could be largely uninvestable. I went bullish on energy. Now, here's the problem. When the markets, if the S&P cuts 50%, that gets it to fair value, mm-hmm. right? That gets us statistical fair value, which means the average. If you clobber the markets, is it really supposed to stop at fair value? No. Statistical fair value is where half of the time throughout history it's below it. Mm-hmm. We haven't been there since 1990. So what's going to happen? Well,
the everything bubble.
It's the everything bubble, who I think Felder gets credit for. But if we do that, every decile valuation, even mm-hmm. the cheap ones, will all go down. Hussman did a detailed analysis, said, here are the deciles, here's what they do in serious bear markets. They all go down. So I could buy something cheap and it could get twice as cheap. And there's a great meme, by the way, in my year in review that I loved. I didn't talk about real estate at all, but there was this couple and a realtor. And the bubble above the couple says, we'd like to see something cheaper. And the realtor said, well, tomorrow I'll bring you back to the same house. It'll be cheaper. And that's what it'll be like.
Yeah, I do think that there will be opportunity in real estate. I think, with certain stocks, there's always going to be opportunity. But yeah, I think for the most part, I maybe don't see it as grim. But Dave, let's pivot to. I'm gonna let you pick the next topic. Do you want to go into Hunter Biden laptop, or do you want to go into World Economic Forum, or would you like to go into Fauci and the magic medicine? What would you like to talk about, Professor Dave?
Well, so the cutting room floor that I wrote but didn't publish was COVID and the vaccine. And it'll be the third year in a row. The first year, I sort of scoped out all the things that were troubling about the narrative and what we did and how we responded. But it was also written right on the cusp of the vaccine getting released. And I had faith that they could do it and that at least we get that. And I thought a lot of the problems I was seeing were sort of really about Trump. And so that anything Trump did was wrong, and therefore all the potential solutions to COVID
Orange
were
man
wrong.
bad.
Orange man bad. So I said, at least now we can start solving problems without Trump being the target. And so I thought HCQ and ivermectin would show up all of a sudden. And after the first year, some guy sent me an email and said, you're missing one critical part of the ivermectin HCQ story. And he showed me a screen grab of the federal law that says that you can't release a vaccine unless under emergency use, unless there are no alternatives. That's when I realized that they had to step on the alternatives, which were ivermectin and HCQ. And I go, wow, that's a serious, serious problem. So by the end of 2022, after I'd written, they had started the vaccination. Within 5 days, the FDA, I think it was the FDA, could have been the CDC, they're one and the same.
Yep.
Put out a tweet, which I went back and double checked because I said, maybe this is photoshopped, I don't know. Put out a tweet that said, we have no data, but we see no reason why pregnant women shouldn't get vaccinated. And I go, you're pathological liars. The fact that they're pregnant is the reason they shouldn't get vaccinated. You'd never give anything to a woman. She shouldn't eat certain foods, right? There's just everything about pregnant women. Thalidomide taught us that, right? So that's when I realized it was something much more darker and sinister. Because if it had said pregnant women should be cautious, but might want to talk to their doctor about the pros and cons, I would have been okay with that. But in the tweet, they actually said you could talk to your doctor, but there's no reason to. I go, holy shit, maybe because he'd say, what are you thinking? Right? Are you nuts? And so that's when I realized the game was on. By April, heads of pediatric societies, national pediatric societies, were saying the vaccine's safe for pregnant women. And I'm going, we're 5 months from delivering the first baby who's been vaccinated in the womb. 5 months away.
Professor Dave, could you back that up and kind of explain that? Let's say you were a doctor. And if you said the counter argument to that you said that the vaccines wasn't safe, you said that they weren't safe, what would happen to you? Would you lose your medical license? What would happen to doctors that went against that narrative?
Well, it's probably drifted over time, but it reached a point where they'd be fired. So there's layers to this onion. One of the layers are the bad guys, the guys who I think are just so undeniably bad. Fauci right at the top of the list, Lena
Vaccine
Wen,
salesman,
the guy setting policy and the guys demanding censorship and stuff like that. So Lena Wen, Fauci, the various players who really controlled the flow of information. And I think they should be taken to the Hague, tried for. And then there's the people who just are highly susceptible to propaganda. Now, I think I've reached the point where I almost won't believe anything they say, even if it's true. So I'm like the reverse of that, I think. There's a book called The True Believer, which you saw, which dominates the introduction, written by Eric Hoffer in 1953. If you read one book this year, read The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. And it's about mass movements and mass psychoses and things like that. And so most people fall into this category where they're so used to saying, well, the authorities wouldn't mislead us. So if they say, look, this is safe and effective, it must be safe and effective.
Well, the idea that our society, we've lived on that, where, you know, right, especially successful people, that ideology has never failed them. Now, when you said blocking the flow of information, I wrote this down, that Fauci's daughter actually was working at Twitter, I believe, and had a part in actually censoring information that was a counter the narrative. I mean, this is disturbing stuff. The Twitter files are actually unveiling to us right now.
Yeah, I haven't paid real close attention to Twitter files, but it's pretty clear that Twitter and the various Facebooks and things like that were being leaned on by the highest authorities, the most powerful authorities, including FBI, CIA, Democratic Party, you name it, and including FTX. You know, just everything was pointing to Twitter. And there's actually evidence Twitter tried to resist. And they just, the forces were too great. So what I will say, in the very least, if you knowingly lied to me, you're my enemy. I don't know what that means, but you are my enemy, which means that I think you're a despicable human being. And if you knowingly, now here's the problem, it gets real vague. What if a doctor knowingly lies to me? Because it's either say that or lose your job. How do you blame a doctor who said, look, I've got mouths to feed? And it's a horrible situation. It's Sophie's choice. She picked one. Is she an evil person for picking one? There's some who are brave enough to resist, but I don't blame the ones who couldn't at all.
Well, the idea, I think what people need to realize is a lot of doctors, because of the way our medical system's set up, is that they are in sometimes millions of dollars of student loan debt. And if they truly don't know, meaning that they're following their authorities, so that's the narrative they're given, and they're not going to go against it. But I think that the point that we're at now, where the information's out there that, the vaccines don't work, it's clear that
they hurt you. They hurt
you. And we are seeing I'll be honest with you, Preston Dave, I had never heard the word myocarditis. I had never heard that.
I hadn't either.
Until this year.
It's rare. It's rare.
And yeah, exactly. And we're seeing so many instances, and the fact that we can't even question it, the fact that we can't even, and all we hear is the same talking point, safe and effective. Well, I'm like, I look back, vitamin C, D, and zinc. These were, medicines that, big pharma doesn't have control. They don't have patents on, they're generic, and
so they don't want them.
Exactly. And, I think back to the town I'm in, we have a sugar refinery, and that was deemed essential. While they shut down hair salons, nail salons, you kept a sugar refinery open during a pandemic. I thought this was about our health.
Yeah, it was a kind of a bear raid on small business. So by businesses that were big, none of the S&P 500 closed their doors.
Oh, Black Friday, Best Buy didn't miss a single Black Friday. Walmart was never shut down as a super
Linda's
spreader.
Diner got hammered.
Yeah.
But Taco Bell didn't fail.
Of course not.
Right. So in 2021, my write-up was mind-bendingly, excruciatingly hard to write, because normally when I write about what happened that year, I write as far as I can and I go, okay, I got to clip it here. But I had this vision of what I had to say. And so I had to finish. It was 319 printed pages. And I write it at the end of the year. So try to put out 319 pages and try to make sure it's well edited and funny, right? And that's hard to do. But I wrote probably 100 pages on rising authoritarianism. I didn't talk about that this year very much. The reason is because I think I nailed it last year. And I don't need to say it again. I think we're at great risk of a truly Orwellian society. And I don't know how to stop it. And that might stop it. So here's what you should do. So I got vaccinated. Cornell said, vaccinate or quit. And so in many ways, that's the same as the doctor who said, you say, play along or quit.
Mm-hmm.
And since it was just a theory that I'd be hurt, and I waited long enough where I go, okay, 20 million people have gotten it, and I'm not hearing horror stories. So I did it, and they made me boost. I'm going, okay, now it's the screwier problem, because now I know the vaccine's not great, but I had no effect on the first two.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'm the guy who's not sensitive to the vaccine, but I'm going to quit my job on the theory that maybe the third one's the bad one. So then I was like, a sunken cost problem.
Sunken cost
And
fallacy.
so I vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
But I speak out against the vaccine militantly.
Well, that's what we need, Professor Dave. That's what we need.
So what I need people to do is to wake up and realize that it was done wrong, and at least from this point on, try to speak truth.
Mm-hmm.
And admit you got duped, and admit the whole thing's horrible. And I talked to Marty Bent, who said that the pediatrician was trying to get them to vaccinate their 2 or 3.
What I would want people to understand is that this is the greatest psyop ever partaken on mankind. This is with DARPA, CIA, military psyop, and I would encourage people to look into the World Economic Forum. And
Right.
this is phase one. This is phase one of the Great Reset. This is phase one of Agenda 2030. The shots do not end, because I want people to really contemplate this, is that when these came out, they didn't say anything about a booster. They didn't say anything about you would need. They said you get it and it's over. It never ends.
Except the card had 10 spots.
You cannot comply your way out of this. That's what I need people to realize. And that, whether you got the shot or didn't get it, essentially you're going to be in the same situation I'm in, unvaccinated, because when the next one comes, you see what I'm saying? It's going to continue. It's going to continue. And Klaus Schwab, and guys, look up the quote yourself. Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, has stated implicitly, no one is safe until everyone is vaccinated. He said it, not me. So I don't know what to do there. I can understand your frustration. I think that, stoicism is a philosophy I follow, and violence is never the answer in stoicism.
Well, what would you have done in 1776?
Great question. Great question. Great. I don't know. I don't consider myself a revolutionary. I don't consider myself, I don't know, Dave. I don't have the answers. I don't know what to do right now.
You ever seen that photo of the vast swath of Nazis doing the Nazis? I can't do it because someone will screen grab it. Doing this, not the Sieg Heil Nazi salute. And there's one guy in the crowd doing this.
Mm-hmm.
That guy is a hero,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have the frontier justice gene, but I don't have the self-sacrifice gene, apparently. So I really do not want to be the guy to fertilize the tree of liberty. But I do think the high road
Mm-hmm.
is to fertilize the tree of liberty.
Well, we can't vote our way out of it. That's what I look at.
That's the problem.
And then if we look through history and we say, okay, well, perhaps where did we combat this in history? And I guess the closest thing you could look to is maybe like Tiananmen Square, or I know you've mentioned before the Canadian trucker protests, and it's like, look how both of them turned out.
Right.
So I don't have an answer, Professor Dave, but I think that we are having a mass awakening, a great awakening. I've had so many of my friends and family, come to me and say like, wow, like this wasn't a conspiracy. You know what I'm saying? So perhaps
I think it is getting out. And so I haven't lost faith in the story getting out. I have no faith that any of the real deserving individuals will be brought to justice. And I feel guilty because Doug Murray talked about justice, and he says when people use the word justice, they really mean revenge. And then he went on a 10-minute diatribe about how revenge is sort of a bad mental state. And I'm listening to him going, that's me right there. But there are times where I think you just say, look, I have had enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, and I know this is, that when you end up in that situation, the outcome is usually not good.
Mm-hmm.
And so show me a violent revolution, and I'll show you one that ended painfully. They don't lead to, Skittles, rainbows, and sunshine right after it's over. They go bad.
I'll be honest with you, Professor Dave. I do lose sleep at night knowing like what's coming down the road, and Agenda 2030. I've read it extensively, and I read a lot of Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome. The best revenge is to not be like your enemy, and
Right.
I think that bringing all this to light, having talks like we're having right now. And again, I just have faith. I have faith that something's going to happen.
See, that's where your faith is a great thing. So I'm, as we mentioned before the talk, I'm an atheist, pro-choice, pagan with a noisy sword, as I once called myself. But I wrote probably 15 pages in defense of religion. And I don't know what to call myself now, because an atheist really sort of dismisses religion. I don't myself want to be religious. I might have some day where it's no longer a choice, where all of a sudden it just hits me like a truck and I go, I've talked to Jesus, right? I can't rule that out. But what I wrote about, what I firmly believe is that first and foremost, the story of Chesterton's fence?
I do not.
Chesterton's fence, brought to you by Brett Weinstein in his book. Guy's about to tear down a fence, and his friend says, why'd they put it up? And the guy didn't know, and he said, you ought to answer that question first. And the message being, and it's a profound one, is something that's been around for a long time is there for a reason. And if you don't know what that reason is, stop and think harder. Figure out why it's there. Why is the appendix there? And we're just now finding out why we have appendix. It's not just hanging off the colon as like some debris. Why has religion been around for many, many millennia? Why is people who are anti-government, who really are maximalist anti-government, I go, every society in history that we know of has chosen government. Every one. The ones who didn't, I'm guessing, got vaporized because government brings order in moderation, right? And religion brings order. And so, I used to think they were doing dastardly things during the Middle Ages, stuff like that. That story's kind of not right. I mean, they were, but it was the Middle Ages. Things weren't that good by any metric. But the church was also bringing order by making sure the nobles didn't beat on the peasants, saying, look, you're going to go to hell, and look what hell looks like. Here's pictures of hell, And so they kept the nobles in check. And it brought order to a world that had very little order. And so I will not in any way criticize the existence of religion, because I think we need it. I don't need it personally, but it helps me every day that people do. And it took me many years to figure that part out.
Yeah. And keep going, Professor. I'm sorry.
Well, and so there's all sorts of structures that society puts in place that are there for a reason. And don't tear them down unless you know what that reason is.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because what like the justice that you want, that we all want, that they're saying that, well, before you get that, they'll just tear down the entire society before we get that. Well,
that's the risk.
Yeah, they'll start the World War III. Like, okay, you want to take us all down? We'll just start World War III. But it's interesting you brought that up, Dave. Mr. Professor Dave, do you believe in an afterlife? Do you believe that there's anything, or
no?
It's
and if there is, I'm hoping I've been good enough to get there, no matter what I say.
Well, it's funny. That is a pillar of Stoicism, that like, if there is a God, if there is a higher being that living a virtuous, good life should allow you to get in, and if it doesn't, then you know what I'm saying? Like, what type of higher power is that? But I'll never be judgmental. Everybody's religion, everybody's that's their own relationship with what they believe, and mine has changed so much over time that you can never be judgmental or something like that. But it's very interesting, Professor Dave. I like to hope there is an afterlife. I do feel something in me that we will be judged for our time on this plane. And I
just believe that we're judged during our time on this plane.
In some ways, yes. In some ways, yes. But But do you believe that, whoever you think is the biggest criminals, the Hillary Clintons, Joe Biden's, Fauci, that they will face some type of justice? Because I don't want to live in a world where they don't.
Boy, that could make me religious fast, thinking in terms of them getting punished.
Jesus show himself.
Yeah, Jesus finally wrapped his arms around me and caught my attention. In one of my year in reviews, I put in a little clause about Fauci when he dies and he's walking to the light and he hears and so I guess would be good if it was there, but I tend to believe we're just one big molecular evolution.
That's what I essentially believe most of my life. Now, Professor Dave, before I let you go,
sorry for all the snorting noises.
No, I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time with me, my brother. I gotta ask you this because I've heard interviews. I'm a big Bitcoin guy. And could you give me, a lot of people come on here and they give me their best Bitcoin elevator pitch for full, transparency to show I'm not biased. Give me the best anti-Bitcoin crypto elevator pitch you could give me.
Anti-Bitcoin?
Yeah, like if that's what you believe now. I don't know if you've shifted.
Well, I believe right now, and I also believe that there could be some moment in time where a switch goes and I flip.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll give you both. Right now, the anti-Bitcoin, I think the two risks is one is that the system just absorbs it. So, for example, take the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. It used to be the Tea Party.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're just the Tea Party wing. And so they've been absorbed by the system and it takes away the bite.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if they do that, what makes people like Bitcoin so much could easily be eviscerated.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, if Bitcoin stays independent and stays alive, it will become a problem because the state has its currency and you guys have yours. Mm-hmm. So if Bitcoin were really to try to reach its greatest moment, right? And like a lot of hodlers I know believe, I think they would do everything they can to step on it. Now, I know the hodlers all say, well, with the blockchain, blah, blah. I get the technical inability to step on it, but there's the human element, right? They can't make me vaccinate. Well, they did, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
So the long arm of the state's very powerful. If they say, for example, that if you do transactions in Bitcoin, 10 years in prison, $10,000 fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be used except for a black market. And so are you really excited about a Bitcoin that's just a black market currency? That doesn't excite me. So that's not interesting. Now, the flip is there could be some moment in time where it appears as though the state has decided to engage, that they're going to take on the hodlers. And by the way, the FTX collapse sure looked like the drumbeat was starting on that. Oh, we got to get in there and do A, B, C, and D. And I'm going, oh, they're going to use FTX to get in there and cause trouble. Like Christine Lagarde and these characters, right? At some point, I could imagine watching that play out and going, the hodlers are winning.
Mm-hmm.
I become a hodler.
Is there a price where you would say, so like right now, if Bitcoin was $1,000 a coin, you wouldn't buy one? You wouldn't, if it went to $500, there's no price.
Well, the problem is that let's say Bitcoin's worthless.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hypothetically, it will go through all those price points on its way to zero.
Mm-hmm.
So the price doesn't tell you anything about what it's worth. Now, if on the other hand, ExxonMobil were to go to zero, long before it got to zero, people would say, so one time my friend David Einhorn did a Bloomberg interview this year, actually, and he said there are stocks out there with PEs of 5.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no taste for these things. And there's no market for deep value stocks. And I know he's smart enough to know that that's a flawed bit of thinking, and maybe he was just trying to provoke people to think. Because if you buy a stock with a PE of 5, and if it's a dependable one, you're buying something that will kick off 20%. Buy it, hold it, don't care about it. Michael Berry said the default setting for any investment should be if it goes down hard, you just hang on to it.
Of course. Long-term mindset.
Now, gold and Bitcoin both suffer from that because I don't know what the price of gold's supposed to be. Gold has a better historical valuation metric, though. And that is that, and the one I don't like is you can buy a good suit with it, because suits have changed so much. That seems, a toga in ancient Rome, what does that tell us, right? But what it also bought in ancient Rome was a month's worth of labor. And a month's worth of labor priced in $22. You go, it's kind of sitting right there again, right? So one could argue that gold has held its value for 2,000 years. And so that is fair value, a month's worth of labor.
Yeah, I see it. What I would want you to look into, Professor Dave, is the game theory of Bitcoin is that, the Russian government owns billions of Bitcoin. Chinese government owns billions of Bitcoin. United States
totally
government.
Valid arguments. Totally
so think
valid
about
arguments.
it. Is one of them going to make something illegal and allow the other to become an economic superpower, and then, factor in the amount of rich people that already own these assets? That's what I'd want you to think about. But no, everything you brought up is completely valid. We're definitely, I'll look at like the buildings on fire and I'm running out this door. I don't know where this door goes to, but I tell people, I tell this, if you ever don't know something argument, look at the people that are bad people that you don't like and see what side of the argument. Yeah. So the Hillary Clintons, all these people that I dislike are anti-Bitcoin. So that's a simplified way of looking at it, I guess.
Well, the other thing the Ruskies and the Chinese are buying is gold.
Lots of gold.
Now here's a funny one. So I'm a climate denialist. I don't care if humans are causing climate change. What I see is $150 trillion grift. I think humans could be affecting it. The scientific models are so crude, they can't possibly predict what they predict. I think it's mathematically impossible. As a friend of mine who was a VP of one of the biggest companies in the world said, there are a bunch of nonlinear equations that are unsolvable, period. But where was I going with that?
Climate, China, I'm assuming China's carbon emissions.
So China. Here's a cute connection, which is not a literal connection, but a figurative connection. China is building monstrous numbers of solar panels and selling them to the West and using the proceeds to build nuclear power plants. Why don't they just hang on to the panels?
Because nuclear is the superior energy form and they are energy independent.
So you want to be bullish? Nuclear. Long-term nuclear. We got to get to nuclear. In fact, I wrote in 2021, I said, my conspiracy mind says that the guys at the top can see the energy problems coming. And they're not going to try to convince us one person at a time that, yes, you have to have a nuclear power plant in your backyard. So what are they going to do? I said, they're going to engineer an energy problem that will make us beg for nuclear power. And I said, mark my words. And then 2022 shows up. What do we have? An energy crisis.
Problem. Yeah.
Right. And so at some point they're going to say, well, we can build these second gen plants right here, and they're not risky, and they use all the uranium right down to zero, and everything's cool as long as you let us do it. And so I think that 25 years from now, the world will be powered by nuclear.
It's the only way. You're exactly right that, the Chinese are making all the solar stuff. They own our politicians. So they get the politicians to push the green agenda, in which we buy from, their shitty solar panels and their shitty windmills that end up killing a bunch of birds and ended up in landfills.
Oh, you're now channeling my wife, who's an osprey expert.
And then on top of that, when we talk carbon emissions, we talk pollution. Well, China's the biggest polluter in the world. So even if we shut down, so I live in Louisiana. If we shut down all Louisiana, we go completely green. We don't even use electricity. We don't even drive cars.
12 seconds of Wuhan.
Exactly, exactly. Nothing's going to change. So, and then, when you see the politicians not come out and reprimand China and, don't see the Green New Deal or any of this attack China or go at China, that tells me there's something bigger going on.
Well, so when we pulled out of Afghanistan in the most chaotic way imaginable, the way I used to describe it in podcasts last year when it was a hot topic was that you could give me a class of first graders and I could get them to design a better pullout. My first question, okay, when you pull out, you got civilians and you got military guys. Who do you pull out first? The answer is civilians.
Civilians, yeah.
And they pull out the military and leave the civilians.
And
now,
leave the
here's the second. And then the question asked is, okay, if you had to deal with the equipment, what would you do? Well, you get a pile of kegs of beer and you have blow shit up Saturday. And you give guys a bunch of grenade launchers and shit and all sorts of cool weapons. You say, okay, we're going to get shit faced. We're going to go party. We're going to go blow this shit up, pull it all together. Or alternatively, if you want to be more responsible about it, you put them all together in a big open space, you drop a mob on it. Mm-hmm. It's gone, game over, right? But they didn't. So what was it? So the Afghan pullout was an arms trade with the Taliban. Mm-hmm. There's no way the CIA thought the Afghan army was going to hold together. If you really want to know why it was a guarantee, the Afghan army only exists because we paid their paychecks. Mm-hmm. When we stopped paying their paychecks, they would cease being an army. We ceased paying their paychecks. So our intelligence guys had to know the Taliban was hours away from taking over. I am confident, negotiated a deal with the Taliban saying, let us get the hell out of here gracefully, which really wasn't true in my opinion, or we will be forced to come back and kick your ass. Mm-hmm. So the Taliban said, we left pallets of $100 bills. We left weapons. We said, here you go, whole enchilada, have a ball. Just don't give us any grief. Now, remember all those Americans abandoned? Remember those stories?
Oh, yeah.
And it looked like it was like a Iran hostage crisis on steroids. Mm-hmm. Did you ever hear any horror stories after that? Any?
Not that I can think of.
Anything where some guy's on Tucker Carlson saying my kid's been trapped and he's rotting in a prison cell and the Taliban are beating him or whatever, No, because the whole thing was orchestrated. Mm-hmm. So here's the problem. When the US president is compromised, and it's quite possible they all are.
About a CCP, the president has a CCP.
I mean, for example, the Clinton Foundation, its biggest donor was Ukraine.
Yep. 100, I believe that was in your newsletter, right? Yep. 100 million, 10 million, I'm sorry, to the Clinton Foundation.
I don't remember the number, but the guy who was paying for all of Zelensky's bizarro purchases and stuff turns out to be the CEO of Burisma.
You can't make it up.
So the stories just get weirder and weirder. And Chrystia Freeland is a Nazi. Her grandfather was a Ukrainian Nazi. She used to work in Ukraine doing propaganda. Remember Nina Jankowicz? She was the one who was going to run the Ministry of Truth in the United States, right?
That got taken down, and Freeland was a member. She's a member of the World Economic Forum as well, correct?
That's right. But Nina Jankowicz had been doing PSYOP shit all over Ukraine for the previous decade. Newsweek pointed that out. They said if someone had dug into Jankowicz, they would have found all this crap. So Jankowicz was not just singing show tunes. And then who replaced Jankowicz? Michael Chertoff, former head of the NSA. Are you telling me they looked at Jankowicz, who's singing show tunes, and Michael Chertoff? They said, oh, let's go with Jankowicz? Chertoff gets the position, and there's not a peep because we've been focusing on Jankowicz the whole time. Mm-hmm. So everything. FTX collapses. They were money laundering, U.S. money through Ukraine back to the DNC, back to super PACs. A lot of people don't know this. The FTX collapse was not a crypto story. It was a money laundering.
It was
story.
A midterm money laundering arm for the Democratic Party, 100%. So all that aid money.
We don't know. We know supposedly how much got lost, but we don't know how much flowed through it. So for all we know, 100 billion went through FTX.
Well, Sam Bankman-Fried was the second largest donor to Joe Biden.
Sam Bankrupt Fraud, right? Sam Bankrupt Fraud, right? Right. And so here's this guy who's supposedly running a crypto fund, donating hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to the DNC.
It's insulting because Gary Gensler was meeting with Sam Bankman-Fried regularly. So
And the whole family was corrupt.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. His mom, his dad. Oh yeah. Which they
But
both.
people don't know this. People don't
They
know
don't.
this.
They don't.
They think it's a crypto story, and then Sorkin and Stephanopoulos are interviewing the guy. And did you see that? Did you happen to catch the picture where I said Sam's trying to look like an innocent character, and I showed this great picture of this Boston Terrier with a big fro, and he looked like Sam Bankman-Fried to me. So the question is Sam so shallow that no one's at risk, or is he Epstein?
Sam, he was a fall guy. I don't think they wanted FTX to fall as soon as it did. That's pretty apparent to me.
They held it off till after the election.
That is true. That
perfectly.
But I think what they wanted to create was a regulatory monopoly using the SEC as their guard dog, and to control the crypto space as well as the money laundering operation. And I think that Sam and company completely blew it. And I don't think it was supposed to collapse the way that it did.
So Marty Bentz thinks that Sam was boy idiot, not boy genius.
Oh, he doesn't think
but the boy genius thing struck me as well. If he's now acting like an idiot, that could be his attempt to cover. But Marty said he never understood what he was doing. He said you could see the holes in his logic. He didn't understand crypto. He didn't understand what he's doing at all. And so here's the question I have. How do you let your son walk into the shark tank of FTX and not realize that you might be committing this guy to wash up on a beach someday?
Well, the jail he was supposed to go to before his parents bailed him out was the jail that Epstein was Epsteined in, which was, shocking. Right. I don't think these people think like this, Professor Dave.
So here's the question. Does SBF know enough to damage people, and therefore is his life at risk, or is he just a throwaway?
Oh no, he
might not know enough. He might not.
I think he does. I think he does. Obviously his parents definitely do.
So if he goes to trial, is this all going to come out in discovery?
That's a great question, because he's talked enough on interviews and stuff that, you would think a lawyer would tell him to shut up at this point, or he'd be shut up.
That's not a trial, though. An interview with George Stephanopoulos, and prosecutor is not going to treat him like Andrew Sorkin does.
Well,
unless he's in the game.
Right? What I'm saying is those interviews could technically incriminate him. I think that,
and the Twitter spaces he did.
Yeah.
Where was his lawyers when he's doing Twitter spaces?
It's definitely a confusing situation. That what I don't think it's I don't think that this is the plan, though. I don't think, because think about it. Here's why I don't think that. It's a very simple way of looking at it. Just one reason. FTX was a listed partner on the WEF's website, right? Right. It was taken. I seen it for myself. So people say it's a conspiracy.
I did a screen grab of it. I got a screen grab of it.
They were a listed partner, but then within days or perhaps a week, a short time, it was taken off. So I can't believe that these evil geniuses would you know what I'm saying, would be that sloppy. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it collapsed. Now, was he a fall guy? Carolyn Nelson, Gary Wang, or are these all fall guys? Absolutely, I think so. And I think
definitely they were fall guys, but are they going to get 5 years of Club Fed? And by the way, if he's a crypto guy, there's no chance he doesn't have crypto accounts waiting for him when he gets out.
Oh yeah, the parents put Bahamas real estate,
$121 million worth of Bahama real estate.
Yeah, he's definitely I guarantee you he's got a wallet with millions in it that he funneled from Alameda Research or from FTX, 100%.
So what he's got to do for it to work out for him, someone whispers in there, said, "Here's the deal. You're gonna have to do some time. Life's tough. Get over it.
You blew it.
Or sorry. But the alternative is that we put a cap in your head. So consider yourself lucky. And when you get out, you'll have all this money in the bank." Sort of like, I think the same thing must have happened to the to the Enron guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing they said, look, because guys like JP Morgan were deeply guilty in the Enron story too. And if you look at the financial crisis, no one there ever got in trouble. They didn't get Corzine. They didn't get anybody. They tried to get one guy. They got a conviction, and they built a phenomenal case. There's one book about the crisis that talked about the legality of the 2008 crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the guys who tried to dig in and get the bad guys and get them in prison just ran into to courts overturning them. And they finally said, we can't do it. We can't get anyone. So they just turned to. So what we did is we bailed out the financial system. And then we made them give a bunch of it back to us in fines.
It's, Professor Dave, I just want to buy land in the country and just disappear. Like
I totally get it.
It's making my stomach turn that, being in crypto, being in politics and stuff and seeing the way it's happened. It's just so disturbing. And I guess for a lot of people that the FTX situation, if they were in crypto, this is what woke them up to what's really going on. If there's any silver lining.
One of the possibilities is COVID will wake up the world
mm-hmm.
to the evil that lurks beneath.
Well, yeah, they'll see if they see what's going on in China. They see what's going on in China, how they're using the lockdowns to restrict their citizens. And then when they see that Klaus Schwab of the WF, I'll quote him, said that China is the model for the rest of the world. So no matter what you think about COVID, look at the conditions in China and ask yourself, do you want that here? Do you want that anywhere? That's what's coming.
So the problem I have at this point is the only conspiracy theories that I can summarily dismiss are the ones that defy the laws of physics.
Mm-hmm.
And I can entertain any idea. Yeah, I'll dump the Loch Ness Monster. That one's I'm fine with. Some guy sent me an email one day that said, I swear if you read this guy's work, gave me a link, he will convince you the world's flat. And I'm looking at this, I go, first of all, I'm not going to waste time. Second of all, the horror story is I read his work and he actually convinces me the world's flat, at which point it's destroyed my life. So there's no way I'm reading about the flat earthers because there's no way to win. Mm-hmm. You either read absurd crap or you become a flat earther. And I read a book about the Manson killers,
mm-hmm.
the Manson family. And it turns out it eventually connects them up with the CIA very convincingly. And part of the the CIA is, using LSD and stuff like that to mind control.
MK Ultra.
MK Ultra. And the guy connects up one of the critical CIA guys in San Francisco back to MK Ultra, and then connects it up with Jack Ruby. And he says, this is the last connection I wanted to make. He says, I could not. He says, I was praying this is not true. It turns out that the guy named Jolly West, who's known to be sent front and center in MK Ultra, mm-hmm. Jolly West has inserted himself into several prominent cases. And one is he inserted himself into the Ruby trial.
Mm-hmm.
And the very surreal story, he somehow found his way in to be a witness for the court.
Mm-hmm.
And he spends an hour with Ruby, who they said, this is the strange thing, they said that when Ruby killed Oswald, he didn't even know he did it. He was all dazed and confused. It just didn't make sense. And then he sort of came to terms with it. West spends an hour with Ruby and comes back and says to the court, he's psychotic. He can't stand trial. And the judge said, screw that. We've had a lot of guys say he's not psychotic. So the judge demands more psychiatrists and psychologists go in and talk to Ruby. And every one of them after that said he was psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
And Ruby was just nuts. And the question is, what did Jolly West do for that hour in his cell? What did he do? And so then it turns out Jolly West, and I posted some stuff on this, and all of a sudden the connections reappeared. Jolly West inserted him into the Timothy McVeigh trial.
Mm-hmm.
And he inserted himself into, what was the other one? There's another one. And you go, holy Jesus, this is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And
a lot of the mass shooters, that there's talk that they were in talks with CIA operatives and stuff. And it's a lot of weird connections that, go into big pharma. But Professor Dave, why I don't really touch too much of the flat earth stuff here's why,
Well,
and
I don't want to touch flat earth stuff. Yeah.
I like to worry about what's in front of me. And
Right.
if you read Agenda 2030, if you read the Great Reset, that's what's in front of us. So let's say
Right.
I spend all day, say I spend a week I'm convinced the earth is flat. Then what?
Yeah, I know. Get you nothing. Get you nothing.
Exactly. And I guess you could say
Right.
looking at this stuff gets me nothing either, but
Well, but there might be something actionable, right? There might be something actionable is your point.
and we could, perhaps make money and, there's
Yeah,
ways
right.
to, but, Professor Dave, man, we're getting on the 2-hour mark. This is way longer than I thought I'd have you for. I'm appreciative for all your time. Could you maybe tell my audience where we can find you at if they want to give you a follow?
Well, I'm David B. Collum on Twitter, and I'm in the Cornell chemistry department. So there are people who reach out, and I try to answer them. I mean,
Mhm.
my email can be a dumpster fire, and I don't give out my email address because I want it to be the minimum intellectual challenge to find it. So if you know
Ah,
I'm in Cornell chemistry, if you know I'm in Cornell chemistry, you can't find my email. You are a twit.
I
And
like it.
so I don't want to talk to you if you can't figure out where my email is. Um, but I try to answer people who reach out. I get a lot of once in a while I'll get some hate mail saying you Putin loving, whatever. But for the most part, I get just people. There's a lot of people out there who have no supporting cast. A lot of people have no support system, and they're looking at the world and they're going, "Holy Jesus, this is driving me crazy. I don't know what to do. Everything thinks I'm nuts." My wife took a drug that made her crazy called Keppra. It's an anti-seizure drug. And we finally figured out it was Keppra. I mean, it really angry beyond comprehension.
Mhm.
And I went on Twitter, and it's something I recommend doing. If you ever take a drug you've never taken, go on Twitter and search the drug
Ooh, that's a good
and
idea.
look and see what the chatter is about. If she once took lamotrigine and she got a terrible rash, you go
Mhm.
on Twitter, they all talk about the rash they're getting and how they had to stop immediately because like a shellfish allergy type thing.
Mhm.
And so you go on Twitter and you read Keppra, and there's all these people who are saying that they're so anxious, they're so angry, and their family doesn't understand them, and the Keppra makes them feel this way, and no one knows this. And I started answering the people on Twitter saying, "Look, my wife just went through this. It is the Keppra. Get off the goddamn Keppra. You have to find an alternative." So I advise people. Now here's the revenge story. One time I put another drug. She had a terrible reaction on one of the chat boards around '07, where their med chat boards were popular at that point.
Mhm.
And at first I read the chat to see if anyone else experienced the same side effects, and there's nothing. And so I posted it and said, "Look, my wife had this experience." And a day later I went back and there was nothing, no one commenting, nothing. And then I went back about a week later and my post was gone. Someone was vetting the chat board to make sure that nothing bad was said.
Thoughts. What do you got? What last thing you could leave my audience with? Something positive, something uplifting. Is there hope, Professor Dave?
There's always hope because I can guarantee you in the 60s, when everyone was getting stoned out of their minds, the parents thought all was lost and it wasn't.
Hmm.
Right. So there's that. Um, you look at what was going on in this country in the 50s. There's been a lot of decades where bad things were happening. So it's easy to get wrapped up. If you go back, Michael Crichton said, look at headlines from 30 years ago.
Oh, you would
The
think the
things are
world was ending.
That's right, and he says they all look stupid in retrospect.
Oh yeah.
And so there's that. The other thing is speak out when you see evil. Um, Speak out. Don't be a bystander.
Mhm.
So I years ago I said, look, when someone says someone should do something, that means you. If you find yourself saying someone should do something, that means you.
Agreed.
And this is why I don't understand when people just stand there. That's right. So speak up. You see something wrong? Speak up. If it means lose your job, think about it. But don't just sit there and go, oh, everyone else seems to agree. Be the sole opponent.
Don't die in vain. Don't die on a, we can be smart, and that's
Yeah, be
really a lot
smart.
of what I try to do with this channel is just try to wake people up, to try to enlighten people. I want everybody to have financial freedom. I want everybody to be free. I want all the buzzwords they use, diversity, inclusiveness. I actually want those things. You know what I'm saying? We just have different
Right.
methods of getting to them. But Professor Dave, this was incredible. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend. And I will keep your family in my prayers. And let's do this again. Maybe we'll touch back in a couple of months. Maybe maybe there's world peace, and we could talk about that maybe.
Yeah, I think 2023 is going to be an economic year again.
Absolutely.
I think it's going to be a lot of economic headlines.
All right.
2022 is actually pretty tame.
Well, I'm Kevin Estopanel, y'all. This is Professor Dave Collum. I would appreciate if y'all give him a follow. He's an incredible guy, and he will be back on the show, y'all. Y'all have a great 2023. I'm out. Peace.